Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our very first Masterclass workshop series, Grant Writing for Beginners with Anna Rose Carrico. CiTR has partnered with Community Arts Council of Vancouver to provide you folks with this very exciting and fantastic workshop series, if I say so myself, happening every Tuesday and Thursday till March 30th. So I hope to see you at our other workshops as well. For those who don't know, CiTR is a campus and community radio station at University of British Columbia. A few housekeeping things before we get into the workshop. Please keep yourself muted throughout the workshop. This event has closed captioning, so you can enable that by clicking live transcript at the bottom of your screen. We will have a Q&A period at the end of the session. So you can ask your questions then, either by unmuting yourself or putting your questions in the chat. This event is being recorded and will later be uploaded to our YouTube channel. You can share your video or you can go off camera, whatever feels more comfortable. And now I'm going to begin. Before we begin the event, I'm going to say a land honoring. And while I do that, I want everyone to just take a moment and reflect on why it is important to do so and what it means to honor the lands we reside on. This workshop is taking place on the unceded, traditional, and shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in the city colonially known as Vancouver. And we honor the historic and continual care of this land by our host nations. Media art practices have traditionally been rooted in white gaze and colonial narratives. CiTR and Community Arts Council of Vancouver understand the power of sharing stories and our responsibility to do so ethically, as well as actively pushing for more equity in the community arts sector. Now, I'll pass it on to Kristen to say a few words.
Thanks, that was great. For folks that don't know, my name is Kristen Chung. I am the Executive Director here at Community Arts Council of Vancouver. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Our mission here at CACV is to further the development of community arts throughout Vancouver. And we've partnered with CiTR Discorder Magazine. We've partnered with them for the past few years as part of our Vancouver Outsider Arts Festival through producing performances, and we're looking at new ways to serve our shared community, and this workshop series just an expansion of our partnership. And yeah, we're excited for this series of workshops, and I guess a little bit of programming information about CACV. We've also started a call for applicants for neurodivergent artists to start a neurodivergent arts collective, so you can hear more about that on cacv.ca/NAC. And we also have a survey at the end of the workshop, so it would be great to kind of fill that out as well, for us to learn more about your experience and how we can improve it for the future. So now I'll pass it to Anna Rose.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to share my screen, which is the basic template for Google Slides. The information, however, is entirely original. So my name is Anna Rose Carrico. I'm the station manager at CiTR 101.9 FM. As Henna said, we're the campus radio station for the University of British Columbia on unceded Musqueam territory. That means I'm also the publisher of Discorder Magazine, which is our bi-monthly arts publication. I am a co-founder, and I currently serve on the board of directors at Redgate Art Society. I'm on the board of directors of Good Night Out Vancouver, and I am on the board of directors as well as the equity officer of the National Campus and Community Radio Association. So between all of these organizations, I have a fair amount of experience applying for grants. And through that as well, I've had the opportunity to sit on a fair amount of selection committees. So I sort of have a little bit of a comprehensive view on the process of applying for grants. So for the overview, I understand that applying for grants can be really intimidating. So my goal for this session is essentially to demystify the process a little bit and hopefully sort of allow you to frame applying for grants in a different way. This is something that I had to do sort of by myself, but basically to view it as accepting help that's being offered as opposed to sort of looking for a handout. So by the time we're done, hopefully you'll, like, at the very least be comfortable with, and at the very best excited about going ahead and applying for grants. So we're going to start with the real basics as an introduction. Just to note that the language and examples that I'm going to be using during this session is music-based, just because that's my area of experience. I almost said expertise, but the fundamentals are generally the same. So these are points that are important enough to mention at the beginning and at the end. You've been forewarned. You will see this slide again. If you take one thing away from this session, please let it be this slide. The first thing is get in touch with the funder for any clarifications you might have. It never hurts to ask, and it will not affect the success of your application. It's also the fastest way to learn the ins and outs of grant writing, in my opinion. Make sure your application has clear, doable, and measurable goals. Collect and organization your documentation as you go. Don't worry, I'll be reiterating all of this over and over again throughout the presentation, so there will be elaborations on each of these ideas as well. Don't get discouraged if your application is not approved. And again, this is more of a framing. It's the funder's job to distribute this funding. So they want to help you. They want to see projects succeed. So it's your job to illustrate why you in particular should be the recipient of that funding. So what is a grant? A grant is a sum of money given for a specific purpose. So a funding body will usually identify a problem that they want addressed or a goal that they want to achieve. And the idea for a solution is proposed by the grantee, which is you. So a grant is not an idea. It's a plan to realize that idea. So with that in mind, an ideal grant application will generally have 1 to 2 goals with clear deliverables that would be needed to meet or measure that goal. So the key terms, funding period. This is the period that all aspects of the projects must be completed and expenses incurred. If you spend anything related to the project, even if it's related to the project before the funding period or after the funding period, you won't be compensated. You can't count that in the grant funding. Activities are the small steps made to achieve the project objectives. So that would be bands booked, equipment rented. Deliverables are the concrete results that must be achieved by the end of the funding period in order to illustrate that you've fulfilled the terms of the grant. So number of events you're hosting, if you are getting a grant to record an album, the fact that that album is recorded. Award or awarded is a term for grant funding given that I really enjoy because it's very sort of fancy and celebratory. In-kind is an important one. So these are contributions to the project that aren't monetary. So that can be volunteer hours or donations of goods and services. An audit is an additional review. This is outside of your final report, in which the grant recipient will be required to provide expense and or project documentation. Again, that's like much more supplementary than a final report. And that goes back to the documenting as you go. An audit can lead to a default, which is a breach of the funding agreement that may require paying back funds, not receiving the full grant amount, or being ineligible for future funding. So this can include spending the grant money on things that were not allocated in the grant application that counts as ineligible expenses, not completing the deliverables at the 12-month financial reporting period. It's really important to note that this might not be a calendar year. It will be 12 months, but it's not actually set in stone what 12 months it may be. So make sure you know what the fiscal year is. So for instance, Factor's fiscal year is April 1st to March 30th. The Community Radio Fund of Canada, where CiTR gets a lot of its funding from, is September 1st to August 31st. So the main 4 grant categories are project-based, operations-based, capital grants, and endowments. For the purposes of this process, we're mostly going to focus on project-based grants because those are the grants that are available for beginners, and this is grant writing for beginners. Capital grants and endowments are generally only available to much larger organizations. Capital grants are for large-scale projects like land purchases or construction projects, and endowments are investments made by donors that an organization can draw on consistently throughout the year. So project-based, oh, sorry, I forgot the slide. Project-based grants are awarded for specific projects and events. They will cover the costs of supplies and materials needed for the project, as well as honorariums or wages for involved parties. They cannot be used for ongoing costs such as salaries or monthly rent, although they often allow for wages and rentals for the specific project. So you can't pay for monthly rent, but if you're having an event, it's appropriate to pay the room rental fee. If you want to pay a sound tech for a specific event, that's fine. You can't pay for general ongoing salaries. So these are often open to individuals and smaller organizations that may or may not have a not-for-profit number. Operations-based grants are designed to support infrastructure, emerging needs, and salaries of the people involved in the operation of the grantee. So this is basically covers what the project-based grants will not. It can also be used for renovations or to upgrade technology. They're for larger organizations and generally require much more documentation on the part of the applicant, such as like not-for-profit or charitable registration number and audited financial statements. Generally with operations-based grants, you have to establish stability and longevity, right? So a lot of operation-based grants will require proof of previous funding, often from the same organization. I know ArtsBC infrastructure grants require previous project grant completion. So again, just showing that your organization has been and will be around for a while before you're going to be eligible for one of those. So the types of funding bodies, the majority of grants in Canada, we're really lucky that we have a pretty comprehensive granting system. So there are federal, provincial, and municipal grants. There's quite a bit that's available, which is pretty nice. Not quite as nice as say like Quebec, but it's still pretty good. Corporate grants and foundations. Some universities and community groups will offer grants or bursaries as well, but these are the main ones. CITR has been lucky enough to receive a bursary from a foundation that allows us to run a not-for-profit record label. The basics of grant writing. So this is the single most useful corporate tool I've ever come across. So I actually recommend using it for all projects, not just grant proposals. So successful grant applications will follow the SMART format. It'll be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. Time-bound is a little wonky. I think they were just trying to come up with a good acronym, but basically it means that it'll follow a specific timeline. So these are the steps. I'll go through the steps just in a list now, but I'll elaborate on each one as we go through the rest of the presentation. So project outline, which I would also recommend to view as a first draft, finding the right grant, the letter of intent, budget draft, final draft, supplementary documents, review, submission, and reporting. Sorry, I'm navigating between two screens here, so. So the first is your project outline. This is highlighted in pink, so you remember it. More and more funding bodies are increasing the emphasis on equitable representation, so which may require some like box checking and background research. In my opinion, all projects should prioritize equity regardless. It does mean that you kind of have to document the identities of those who will benefit or be involved in the grant, which can feel a little bit gross, to be honest, but it's better than the alternative, which is like doing nothing to further justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion goals. It's not perfect. It's better than the alternative. So the basics of project proposals follow really basic format. Who will be implementing this project? Who will be involved, like the artists or the community partners? Are there any partnerships with other groups or organization? And in that case, what is each group responsible for? Through like no effort on my part, the Redgate and CITR have done a few collaborative grants. And so basically, if we coordinate on a event series, you know, we would clearly spell out CITR is going to handle the administrative side, invoice collection, artist management. The Redgate is going to provide technical staff and the room rental. So spelling it out clearly. What exactly will happen? What are you trying to achieve by this project? What are your markers of success? And what, if any, are your other sources of financial support? So what is the timeline of this project? So include specific deadlines and benchmarks for activities. So the personnel will be hired by May 30th. Promotional materials will be distributed by August 1st. And who will be involved when? So when is the technician coming in? When are you hiring the graphic designer, et cetera? Where is very self-explanatory. Where is the proposed activity or activities taking place? Why is probably the biggest one, right? Who will benefit from this project? What communities or individuals are you serving? Why do you need financial support for this project? Why is this project important? Specifically, why is this project important within the parameters of your goal or the grant opportunity? And why are you specifically qualified to complete this project? So it's really important to know the answers to all of these questions before you get started, because it'll help you find the right grant to apply for. So this can be just a little bit more universal. So finding the right grant, some tips and tricks. So research grants that are appropriate or could be appropriate with minor tweaks to your project. So you could tweak your project. A good way to do it is to sort of look at the issue the grant is trying to address and then emphasize the aspects of your project that will do so, or add realistic changes so that it does. So like, for instance, if you wanted to have a musical showcase, you find a grant that emphasizes new distribution techniques, you could look into live streaming your show on like various platforms. So it adds another element that helps your project fit into the criteria without creating a ton of other work for you. Do not create a project to fit into a specific grant. It can be really tempting to see like an amount like, oh, they have $150 for blank. If it's not within your purview and it's not within your capacity, just don't even register it. It can be really easy to sort of pile tasks on because it's tempting because of the dollar signs, but like most artists and arts organizations are pretty much operating at full tilt as it is. So definitely stick with what you're passionate about and what you know you can accomplish. Carefully read through the eligibility requirements to ensure you can apply. Know the submission dates of the grants you're interested in. So most granting bodies, or many of them, they'll have a calendar of when applications open. Even if they don't, you can check and see when the call for applications were like the previous year or the year before that, and check back in at around the same time. What I do is I just set calendar recommendation or reminders to check in on when grant application periods open, just to check in. Look for a list of previously approved projects. Again, like on the website, a lot of funders on their website will have a list of projects that were funded in previous years. So that will really give you a sense of what they're interested in funding. I also strongly encourage you to contact the funding body to ensure that you fit the eligibility requirements. If you don't fit the requirements, you'll like avoid a lot of wasted time, and they might even be able to suggest other grants that are more appropriate for your project. So your letter of intent. So some grants do require a letter of intent, and some don't, but I still think it's a really great starting point, and you can kind of view it as your first draft of your application or your second draft of your application. And then your full application will expand on it and provide more detail. So an advantage of the letter of intent is that it allows you to lay your project out in the simplest way possible. And yeah, you can use it as a starting point for the full application, and that'll ensure that you stay true to your vision, basically. So what I generally do is I use the outline to build, or I use my letter of intent to build on my outline, and then I use my draft to build on my letter of intent. So a good letter of intent is a clear summary of your project. It'll get them excited about your project. It will name the key elements of your project, the who, what, etc., that I mentioned before. It will state the amount needed for the project and the amount that is being requested from the funding body. Generally, those will be two different numbers. And it will illustrate why you are qualified to complete the project. If you can, and this actually goes for the rest of the grant drafts or the application drafts and the submission, avoid using I and we statements. So for CITR, instead of saying our mandate, we would say CITR's mandate. So next up is your budget draft. Grants will generally provide anywhere from like 200 to 100% of the cost of the project. I know it can seem really daunting to think that you'll have to make up the remainder, but it often doesn't have to be cash out of your own pocket. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Sorry. Budget. So every grant application requires a clear and realistic underline budget, and most have their own template to fill out. So whenever possible, make sure that you are using the one they provide. They'll might ask for things that you may have missed and also give you a really good sense of sort of the level of detail that they're looking for. Whenever possible, don't estimate. And again, this is even if they don't ask for this information, do your research and get accurate pricing and include sources. So you know you're going to need to rent a PA. It's going to be $600. You know that because you called Long & McQuaid and they quoted you that. Make sure grants that require, or many grants, sorry, require matching or partially matching funds from the recipient. So make sure you know what they accept. A lot of places will accept in-kind contributions, revenue from the project, or revenue from other grants. It might seem kind of counterintuitive to have other grant revenue, but it's actually usually seen very favorably because it shows that there's already outside investment in the project. There's already groups that believe in what you're doing and believe that you can do it enough that they're already kind of putting their money where their mouth is, or where your mouth is, I guess the case may be. So your final draft. So the most important thing in a grant application is a clear underline explanation of the activities and the goals of the project. So they'll want to see actual goal numbers, so like number of attendees at a festival, and names of partners or contractors, like the venue location or the other organizations involved, musical acts that you have booked. So avoid leaving anything up in the air. It's helpful and it's nice to include like passionate explanations with a lot of adjectives about why you think the project is important. A checklist of the things that you want to accomplish to compare at the end of your project is much more essential. If you need to change anything after you get approval, you can usually ask for an amendment to your agreement. Granting bodies generally understand that things change, especially in the arts, right? Like you're not going to be able to predict everything, but that should be a last resort. You should really, really try to stick to the plan that you've set forward. It's really important to demonstrate your experience in this industry, as well as your experience with these specific projects. So I've noticed that many grants, like it seems like you have to answer the same questions over and over. And I used to like my imposter syndrome, and I like understand that I'm the only person on the planet to have imposter syndrome. But I almost felt like they were trying to catch me in a mistake or something. But what it really is to give you the opportunity to include anything that you may have missed in a previous question. And it's also to illustrate that you've really considered the project from all angles. So what I used to do is kind of bust out the thesaurus and just reformat the same answer over and over again, but with different words. But instead, I really recommend that you try to understand why they're asking that question and what specifically does that question mention that the previous questions didn't. And that's sort of how you're going to find the answer or what they're looking to be addressed. If possible, show concrete examples of your experience. So projects you've already completed and especially grants that you've already received for similar projects. Be realistic. So it's better to overpromise than underdeliver. If you can't fulfill your deliverables, you might be asked to return some of your funding, not receive the total awarded amount, or be ineligible for future grants. If you know you can have 200 people show up to a show, say 150, if 200 show up, then you're this great overachiever, right? You really know how to get these projects going. If 100 people show up, then that's not going to look as good, right? So next is providing your supplementary documentation. So most grants will require supplementary documentation. Again, this can vary like quite wildly. So mostly it will be financial statements. It may include letters of support from partners or industry peers, quotes from vendors, if you have them, not-for-profit or charitable registration certificates, again, if you have them. I recommend providing as much of the non-essential information as you can. So like a lot of grants will have an option for letters of support. Don't ignore that, right? If you go above and beyond, it shows that you're passionate. It shows that you've already been willing to put time into this, and that there's support outside of you or your organization for this project to happen. Definitely double check whether the financial statements have to be audited or not. Depending on the size of the organization, this may or may not happen anyways. But if it does need to be audited, it's a much more time consuming and generally more expensive task, depending on like your connections and your background, I guess. So if there is an opportunity to submit letters of support, definitely take advantage of it. Letters of support are from your partners or from peers is a great way to illustrate enthusiasm for your project. So a good letter of support should contain an explanation of the working relationship between you and the writer. So if she's your aunt, tell her not to say that. How the writer will be involved or benefit from the project. And again, why the writer believes that you specifically are qualified to complete this project. So the letters should also relate directly to the current project application, as opposed to your organization as a whole or yourself personally. So once all this is done, you get to review. Again, do not hesitate to reach out to the granting bodies for help. The program manager is there to help you. Some might even look over your application and provide tips before you submit if you ask. There's no downside to this. The program manager is not the person who's making the decision on your grant application. Even if they were evil and they thought, oh, this person has asked me so many questions, they've been such a thorn in my side, I'm not going to give them this funding, which would like never happen. Even if they wanted to be that person, they absolutely couldn't be. That's not the way that the process works. I understand that it can be pretty intimidating to reach out to these. I know they can feel pretty kind of opaque, I guess. But a lot of the granting bodies that I've spoken to have really wished that they get more engagement from potential applicants. This is especially true of applicants from equity-seeking communities. Like a lot of areas of life, unfortunately, it's more likely that people that are already enjoying privilege will ask for help as a given. They'll already feel empowered to ask for this support. It's inevitable that you will be unsuccessful with some of your applications. Applying for funding is extremely competitive. Often granting bodies are forced to choose between like good applications and great applications. Sometimes it's even great applications and excellent applications. So what's really important is to follow up if your application is rejected to see what you could have done differently. And again, this falls into the category of documenting your entire process, because another thing that you want to avoid is just totally reinventing the wheel every time you apply for funding, right? There's a lot of lessons that can be learned from one application that can then be applied to the next one. So this is a super important part. You have to give yourself time for this, is to get as many ideas on your grant application as possible. So ideally, you'll have someone involved in the project, someone with no awareness of the project, and someone who's familiar with the grant that you're applying for. So when someone involved in the project reviews it, they might be able to identify details or goals or even mission that you may have missed. The latter two are really important. So you can ask the project coordinator or manager from the granting body. They might not be able to. Again, it does not hurt to ask. If they can't, try to reach out to someone you know or a friend of a friend who successfully applied for that grant in the past and get that insight. If you can't do that, any grant works. What I would recommend, though, is try to find someone who's applied for a grant from the same granting body as opposed to applied for a similar project. So if you're applying to CreativeBC to produce an album, I would try to find someone who's successfully gotten funding from CreativeBC in the past, as opposed to someone who has successfully gotten funding to produce a record in the past, if that makes sense. The benefit of asking someone who's not involved in the project, preferably not even the sector at all, so like a friend or a family member, or if you just want to like pick a name out of a hat, there are probably aspects of your proposal, again, and of your sector and of your organization that will seem self-evident to you. So the grant selectors will need to understand very clearly who you are and what you're trying to do. And the best way to get a sense of that, of how clear it is to give it to someone who has no idea what's going on, basically. So next is the submission of your grant, that moment when you click the submit button, the rush of adrenaline. I don't know if anyone else sees submitting grant applications as a thrill ride, but it's pretty entertaining. I recommend you try it. So when you submit, prepare as far in advance as possible. Don't wait until the deadline. Give yourself a buffer of at least a week. Just set it in your head. It's a week before the actual submission date. Ensure that you have a copy of the submitted version for your reference. Again, this goes back to documenting everything as you go along. Some applications will allow you to download a PDF of the actual submitted application. If you can't, make sure that you have a copy of the application like verbatim. So this can help you with future applications. You know, save all the drafts, save everything, basically. We're trying to avoid, again, reinventing the wheel as much as we possibly can. There's a lot of stuff that will have like a through line, and that is like kind of universal experience or information. If you don't get confirmation, contact the funding body to make sure that they received it. Stuff can go wrong all the time, right? If you get an email, make sure you file that email, screenshot any pages that say your application has been successfully submitted, so you have a timestamp. Obviously, write down any kind of reference number anywhere, even if you don't ever use it again. Do not assume that you'll hear back about the status of your application in the slated time frame. The larger the organization, the more of a bureaucracy it's going to be. Sometimes stuff just doesn't happen on time. One thing that's really important to remember is that you will get a response one way or the other. If you don't get a response within the stated time frame, do not assume that your grant hasn't been approved, because that's absolutely not the case. They will tell you. Sometimes you have to wait months for approval. Sometimes you have to wait until after the funding period has started. I've gotten notifications over a month after the stated deadline. it just happens. So yeah, so don't assume anything. No news isn't good news, but it's definitely neutral. So the grant selection process, this is from my experience. So granting bodies will usually contact people in the industry from outside their organization to evaluate the applications. They're given a rubric that awards points for each section of the application or each priority. The points then are given by several people individually. They're added up to make the total score for the application. And then basically it's just the numbers, excuse me, of who's actually going to get that funding. So grant selection committee, I guess, is kind of a misnomer. In my experience, they don't really, the different committee members don't generally communicate directly. If there are wildly different scores, then there will be follow-up and maybe even discussion between committee members. Again, the program officer is not the one selecting successful applicants. Any communication you have with the program officer is not going to affect it. I mean, unless you're like horrible, don't do that anyways. I actually have no idea if that would affect it or not, but just don't do it. As well as the amount of times you've unsuccessfully applied. That's not going to factor into it either. The people evaluating may not be aware of your organization or previous applications, so they'll be scoring based on the information in front of them only. CreativeBC and a lot of other organizations, I'm just using CreativeBC as an example because I have their sheet in a later slide, but they actually post their point system along with the grant information, like along with the applications and stuff. So it really allows you to see the order of priorities by the number of points they allow per section. This is really important. The granting body will not follow up for clarification. So make sure you've provided everything they need to make a decision. So this is that form I was telling you about. You can see, the relevance of the project is worth 50 points. Financial viability is worth 30 points, and on and on. So it really shows what you should be focusing on, basically. So you've gotten the grant, you've done your project. What's up next is reporting. It depends. Some grants require a midterm report as well as a final report. Some require quarterly. Just be clear. Make sure that you know those deadlines. This is also a stage that's kind of overlooked because basically, like, you work really hard on your grant application. Let's say you get the funding and then you'll immediately go through implementing your project, which of course is the part that you're actually excited about. And it can really feel like you're done after that. It's really important that you submit your final report correctly because this can affect future funding. So you will have to report. Again, it varies wildly from grantor to grantor. Sometimes it's a simple list of the deliverables you've achieved to a full report with documentation like invoices from vendors, receipts, any materials or documents created as part of the project, copies of promotional materials. So yeah, I strongly recommend that instead of viewing the reporting period as homework, and if you've followed my advice of documenting everything that you went along, it shouldn't be too much of a headache. Yeah, think of it as a list of your accomplishments. You've done this really great thing. You've finished this project. And so it's an opportunity to your own horn. So yeah, regardless of what the reporting requirements are, it's really best practice to compile all this documentation as you go along anyways, as you get receipts, file them, etc. So that way, if you do get audited, you don't have to scramble to find the other information. Another really great thing to include, if they have space for it, is anything press related or press that is related to your project, because that always looks very impressive. So next I have a couple of examples of questions and answers. I am going to take a sip. So this is a question about deliverables. So what are the deliverables of this project? So the first 4 deliverables are: 1, provide a wide variety of special programming that engages our community. 2, train and engage volunteers in the production and programming. Building skills and capacity among volunteers. 3, improve the quality and consistency of our programming, providing staff hours for research and training. 4, build our public profile by increasing the quality of our special programming and by adequately sharing and promoting this programming. You can tell it's really radio-based. So this is really nice. What this actually is a list of goals. So that can be useful in a different part of the application. That's not what a deliverable is, though. It has no concrete steps, so it'd be really difficult to measure the success of the project. So the clear deliverables: 1, establish a temporary satellite location. 2, add 4 to 6 new weekly or bi-weekly shows. 3, recruit and train 20 to 30 new volunteers and 5 to 10 broadcast contributors. 4, facilitation of 2 to 4 panels and 25 to 50 training sessions. You can also note that the range is quite wide, so that allows for a lot of wiggle room. But as you can see, the second list of deliverables can basically be answered by a yes or no. Did we establish a temporary satellite location? Yes or no. Did we add 4 to 6 new weekly or bi-weekly shows? We actually added 8 because we knew what we were capable of, and now we look like these great overachievers. So the second example question is a rationalization for a specific role within a grant. So how does this position support your mandate? The unspecific answer is work performed by the candidate is essential not only for day-to-day operation of the projects, but also to successfully promote the initiatives to all members of the community. Furthermore, this opportunity will encourage and support personal growth and professional development of the candidate. Again, sounds lovely. There's no specifics in it. So an informative way of doing it is CiTR's ability to carry out its mandate, building community through teaching local alternative media, will be directly affected by the contributions of this role. The organization cannot function without a comprehensive administrative support system. CiTR needs to have its financial systems running smoothly. This position will ensure that checks and cash disbursements are distributed and invoices are issued and paid on time. In addition, the position will give the candidate experience and training in bookkeeping, data entry, and client communication. So it states our mandate. It states how the role will directly contribute to that mandate. It states what the specifics of that role is, as well as specifically how the candidate will benefit. And here we are. Points that I mentioned at the beginning and I'm now mentioning again. Okay, get in touch with your funder for any clarification or feedback that you need. It never hurts to ask. It will not affect the success of your application, and I guarantee you will learn a ton from it. Make sure your application has clear, doable, and measurable goals. Collect and organize your documentation as you go. It's better to be safe than sorry. It's better to have too much than too little. Do not get discouraged if your application is not approved. And it is the funder's job to distribute this funding. This funding is here for these projects. So it's just your job to illustrate why you should be the recipient of said funding. Yeah, that's it for my presentation. So I'm going to try to navigate back. I just realized I wasn't on the right screen. It'd be pretty funny if I was muted the whole time.
All right, amazing. Thank you. Right on time. Thank you so much, Anna Rose, for this very informative workshop on grant writing. And I hope everyone enjoyed the workshop and hopefully learned something new today. If you have time to complete the short survey that Kristen mentioned, we would really appreciate your feedback. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. And now it is time for the Q&A. Please stick around if you can. And this portion of the workshop will not be recorded.